Spirit Switchboard, airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 New Orleans.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Spirit Switchboard. We are broadcasting live from the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Radio Paranormal Network at 105.3 and 107.7 New Orleans. Today, I'm really excited about having my guest on today, Nicholas Pearson. He is an author and crystal healing teacher. I'm just going to bring him in. Welcome to the show, Nicholas.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So when I was looking through this, I went to your website, and I was pretty excited about reading your website. Your website is authentic, has integrity. You can feel your intention in the work that you do. As soon as you hit that website, you can feel all of that. And your journey, you're so transparent about your journey through all the different modalities and learning and education that brought you to this point. Can you share a little bit of that journey with us?
Well, thank you for that. You know, it's been a long road getting me here. I've been a mineral collector for 30 years. I've been involved in the healing arts for a couple of decades, and all of that kind of comes together in my love for rocks and my love of sharing that love with others. So I started out, I think like a lot of kids, picking up rocks everywhere I went and just falling in love with every little bit of stone and gravel and just finding magic in the landscape. And my grandfather saw this and gave me my first mineral specimen, a piece of clear quartz from Hot Springs, Arkansas. It's still in my collection. It's been photographed in a couple of my books. And this kind of inert part of the landscape was transfigured into something luminous and special and seemingly magical. It was like holding something out of a fairy tale in my hand. And, you know, from that point forward, I kind of wanted to pursue crystals through two lenses. I've always been a fan of science. Earth and environmental science is part of my background in school. And I kind of channeled that in, but I'm a big lover of folklore, mythology, fairy tales, spirituality. So I've always kind of looked at things through the metaphysical and the mineralogical lens when I get to know the mineral kingdom. And that's been what's been driving me forward ever since.
And it's not, I think what struck me when I was, moving through your website was not very many people get to have their passion roll into their path and purpose. And you could see that journey for you, how your passion ended up being your path and purpose, and how this all came together for you.
I'm really grateful for it. It's been a string of interesting synchronicities that brought me here. And initially, I went to college to study music, and I ended up, we'll say, randomly assigned, because that's what the paperwork said,
right,
to work at an Earth Science Museum on campus, which I didn't even know existed. I selected my school for its prestigious music program and thought nothing of the rest of it. And there I was working hands-on with one of the largest mineral collections in the southeastern US. And, you know, little events like that kind of kept nudging me in the right direction.
But that's trust. That's trust and surrendering into a process that you may not have even realized was going to unfold for you. And I think that, my journey with crystals, it's sort of the same thing, is that trust where you're being led and you just take those steps. And the more you trust, the more unfolds for you that leads you into the right direction.
Well, some of it's been trust, some of it's been falling flat on my face and picking myself up and going in different directions. I think we learn one way or another how it's going to turn out.
Yeah, falling flat on our face is sometimes where the best and biggest growth ends up happening.
absolutely. In about 2008, 2009, I set about to write my first book. That book has never been written. It never will be written, I don't think, but it did not pan out well. And I was young enough that I don't think I had the life experience to really have a sense of authority or expertise on my subject, apart from just knowing rocks really well. I didn't know enough about
Yeah.
them. So,
And I mean, it's more than using crystals and teaching about crystals and the healing aspects of crystals. That's just one little facet of who you are and what you have to offer. I mean, besides the books, and then there's Reiki on top of that as well too, and the scientific background. Like you really bring the all sides to it, right? To understand from a grounded left brain aspect to the more esoteric side of it, which I love. I love that.
well, thank you.
It's because I got so excited when I was reading the titles of your other books, because we're going to talk about the Crystal Basics, the Pocket Encyclopedia today. But if I had known, let's talk about the floral essences and the Witch's Garden too, because that's brilliant. It's brilliant, all of it, what you have to offer.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think part of what fuels my ability to keep churning out books is my love of learning. I love to share the things that I learn, and flower essences have been a big part of my journey. And it just at some point kind of organically came up, maybe this can be the next project. And that's how Flower Essences from the Witch's Garden was born.
But that's following those steps, right? It kind of fell into the path, and then you walk through it. And there's such an intention in empowering people. So taking what you've learned and giving those people who want to learn, or who, wherever they are on their journey, the beginning or the middle, or if they're a little advanced, they're going to be able to come away with something that you have to offer that's going to help empower them on their journey. And you can feel that intention when you're even flipping through the Crystal Basics, the Pocket Encyclopedia. You can feel that intention that you bring to the table.
Well, thank you. That's definitely the goal. I want to have something that meets people where they're at, but also gives them tools to grow.
And in an easy way. Like, it's not with the Crystal Basic, the Pocket Encyclopedia. I'm just going to pull this up so people can see the cover for you. There we go. It's there's so much with this. It's in tapping into Crystal Basics was the original book, correct?
Yeah, so I released Crystal Basics in 2020, just at the onset of the pandemic. Actually, it was when it was slated for release, and it was a big book. I put a lot of time and effort into it. It only has 200 stones in it, but larger, longer treatments of each one. But about 50% of the book is how-to material. It's hands-on. It's a textbook. It teaches you how to discern what a crystal does by examining its composition, its chemical formula, its formation process, its crystal structure, how to suss out exactly what a crystal can offer for you by looking at the geology of it. And then it takes you through all of the foundational stuff, from choosing crystals to cleansing them, programming them, making grids and elixirs and layouts, and doing more advanced meditations. It's got quite a lot packed into it, and it was something I wish I'd had when I started, 25, 30 years ago. But seeing that reach the market, seeing the success of it, but then also receiving the most meaningful critique that people gave me, which was, it's really big, it's not portable. Eventually, I wanted to take that and do something unique, and create a little sibling, if you will, in the case of the Pocket Encyclopedia, and really, really strip it down to the basics. So it's not 200 pages of how-to. It's a couple dozen pages of how-to, and added some new material to it, and went above and beyond the 200 stones that are in the original.
And okay, I wrote it down because I need to find it. You can correct me because, yeah, there it is. You added rare stones and like rare minerals in this book that aren't in the Crystal Basic book as well too. So what led you to choose those rare ones into this book?
Well, there are some pretty rare and unusual ones in the big Crystal Basics, but given that I had space for a lot more stones, I wanted a really broad range. I wanted things that you couldn't find in other books that you might be able to find on the market, but just aren't in published resources yet. I also wanted really humble and common stones, things like limestone and granite and chalk and flint, because every part of the geosphere, every part of the earth is full of magic, is full of mystery and potential for healing. And then, of course, I'm a collector of fine minerals. I love weird rocks. My science background means that I love unraveling the geological story behind things that are rare and unusual. So I wanted to make sure that there was something in here for everyone that reminded us of the magic among the kind of mundane rocks. And empowers us to turn to whatever resources are available to us. Because one of the strange things about crystal healing among most kinds of like energy medicine modalities is it's very consumer oriented. You buy a rock to do a thing with it. It's not like a training you take once and use in perpetuity. If you want to expand the toolkit, you go and you buy new things. And to kind of break down some of the hold that capitalism has on that, I want to remind people that ordinary rocks are still made out of crystalline components. They still are made out of minerals. They still have the same magic, the same potential for healing that other things do. So there's a really good mix of common healing stones, ordinary rocks, and then some of the rare and unusual stuff.
And the limestone was actually one of the first ones that I stuck in my pocket as a little kid. Where I grew up in Northern Ontario, and pudding stone and limestone were the two that I was filling my pockets with. And the limestone actually had fossils in them, like little shells that were in them, and it was magical for me. And that's where I started. The name that I wrote down was euperite. It just sounds fun to say, and I'm probably saying it wrong. So you can correct me.
So that one is a type of igneous rock that we call syenite. So syenite is a lot like granite, except it's, we'll say, deficient in quartz. So it doesn't have quite as much silica as a granite would. And one of the group of minerals that you'll find in there are sodalite group minerals. And in the case of the euperlites, the sodalites that are in them are not the brilliant, deep indigo blues like we see in the gem quality sodalites that we get from places like Namibia and Brazil. Instead, they're kind of boring colored until you put them under an ultraviolet lamp, and then they glow brilliant colors. And it gets the name euperlite because it comes from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, or the UP for short. So people from the Upper Peninsula are called Youpers. So euperlite, the stone from the UP.
Interesting. I wonder if that's why I was pulled to it too. It's an energy thing, right? I mean, people are attracted to stones without even realizing the why. Like they maybe not understand the energy that's attracting them to that particular stone, right? Until they take the time to research it. Or at least from my experience, that we're pulled to maybe the energy and the magic to it, and are allowing that stone to do what it's doing because it has those qualities to it without realizing we're giving it permission to do that for us. Does that make sense?
So, I always encourage people, especially when they're at the start of their journey, to disregard what you're going to find on note cards in the store, what descriptions you see in memes on the internet. Don't go to the books first. Go to the stones first. Start by building relationships. Start by connecting to them one-on-one, face-to-face. And I mean, chances are, if you're looking at something with a really short form kind of description of it, like you might see on display, a little placard that's got the name and what it does, there's a good chance that you're not going to get what you need from that description. especially if you're coming across something brand new for the first time. Maybe you'll get lucky and you go, oh, aventurine. It's a stone associated with abundance. That's a thing I'm really working on. But that's such a reductive thing. When we really get to know crystals, we take it to a whole new level. And oftentimes it's only by really spending time with it do we discover what brought us together in the first place.
And different layers of yourself. Like it pulls up layers of healing or experiences that, like, crystals can really push your awareness to a whole other level. And if you're looking at it just from a commercial aspect, I'm just going to pull this down. I think that people, maybe what their original intentions are in being pulled to it changes as their awareness and healing journey expands.
If we really approach crystal healing as a relational experience, it's a collaborative effort that we work on with the stones rather than using them as tools, inert substances that effect a change, then we do get the opportunity to peel back the layers, so to speak. There are, stones in my life that I brought into my life for a specific reason. And the longer we journey together, the more our relationship grows, the more I learn about the stone, the more I learn about me. But we have to be willing to sit with something for long enough for that to take place. We live in a world where it's once and done. I bought the tool, it's time to move on. And that's not what traditional healing has looked like. That's not what, getting to a state of wholeness looks like. There's no, there's no switch we can flip and then just suddenly be healed. It's a process of perpetual growth, perpetual change, and it's often incremental. It's often very small.
It's layered, for sure. It's layered, and it can be uncomfortable, and not everyone can sit with the uncomfortable. That sometimes comes up on their journey.
Sometimes it is uncomfortable and sometimes it's joyful. Everyone's experience is unique.
Exactly. But how, like, when do you, I guess I'm trying to figure out how I want to phrase that question. Understanding what your journey is, understanding your intention, like intentions matter as well too, do they not?
Intention is a piece of the puzzle, but we live in a world that I think puts too much stock in intention and not enough in everything else that happens. So I like to think of it this way. We have a kind of threefold formula, and we need all three components to achieve our end result. We've got our intention is like a steering wheel. We definitely have to have it. It's got to aim us in the right direction.
Yeah.
We have the practice, the tool, the thing we're engaging with, that's the vehicle itself. So, you can have the best intention, but if I just hand you a steering wheel and point to the highway, if it's not attached to a car, you got nothing. And most importantly, you've got your vehicle, your steering wheel is aimed in the right direction, but did you put fuel in it? And this is where our raw kind of willpower, our emotional state comes into play. How do you feel about the process? And then we have to navigate that. There are better quality fuels and lower quality fuels. So yes, intention is important, but absolutely it's not the only important thing. On its own, it gets you nowhere.
And so how do you determine the specific crystal, what that specific crystal does, or understanding the different functions of the crystals?
So there are a few ways we can do this. Historically speaking, we've got a large body of lore that comes from all over the world, and we can compare and contrast. And that's a thing that I love doing. I have an ongoing series of master classes where I pick a single stone and we just dive in from every perspective throughout history around the world. So we can look at tradition, and traditional uses are really good clues. Another thing that we can do is use the geology of a crystal, kind of like the doctrine of signatures in herbalism. We use the kind of clues that are encoded in an herb or a plant to understand how it might help medicinally speaking. And we can do similar things with the energy of crystals by looking at its formation process. Is it formed by igneous activity, sedimentary, metamorphic activity? Is it a kind of blend of two of those? We can look at the crystal system. If we map out all the points in space taken up by the components of it, there's a kind of overarching symmetry. And we use these 7 groups of symmetry to describe crystal forms and organize minerals accordingly. So those are like the personalities, if you will, in the crystal families. And that gives us a kind of clue. And then we can also look at the signature in its chemical composition. So, iron, for example, iron-bearing minerals are going to be grounding, fortifying. They connect to the energy of Mars because iron has a long tradition of being associated with the planet Mars and alchemical and astrological lore. We could look at, lithium minerals as expansive and buoyant. They teach us surrender. We can look at things that are rich in magnesium as being good for improving mental flexibility, and the list goes on and on. And if we take a look at all of these different things and other clues that might be encoded in the crystal itself, the actual stone, then we get a pretty good picture of how it can support us. Now, I say all of this as a good kind of preparatory thing, but when I get to know a new stone, before I look up its history, before I sit down and decode it, the very first thing I do is I just observe. How do I feel when I hold this stone? How does it compare to other things? If I hold it tomorrow, do I feel the same way? Because we have to remember that crystals are doing 2 things simultaneously. They're, of course, bringing their own energy in, but they're master reflectors. They're going to reveal to us what we might not be conscious of. So some of what we feel when we work with crystals is our own stuff. And we therefore can't put it all on the stone until we see how we work through that stuff over and over again. So the more time we spend with the same crystal, as well as the more time we spend with crystals generally, we build a kind of lexicon of crystal energy, of crystal effects in our own lives. And that personal experience is the most important component and will often help you tie together what other people are saying.
Do you find, though, that people, that's part of the education, I think, that people are also needing, is that take the time, understand that it's a relationship that's being created. It's not something that's necessarily going to happen immediately, that it is a process, that relationship.
For sure. And subversively, I've been transparent about this, but that is like my hidden agenda in every book that I've written. It's teaching people, 1, to think for themselves by looking at all the available data, and 2, to go do it themselves and have the primary experience, because nothing is better than that primary experience.
So would you encourage people to also be mindful of where they're purchasing their crystals from as well too, like the ethical sources or mining it themselves, because would that make a difference?
So this is actually a really big thing that I have been tackling these last few years in particular, and this concept of ethically sourced crystals is massive. We've got probably more buzz about it than there's ever been in the history of mining. And the challenge is that it's a completely unregulated term. It doesn't mean anything to anyone except the person using it. So anyone can say, this is an ethically sourced crystal, and this is not, just because they said so. And the problem, therefore, is that how do we trust people to define this term the same way as us? So I want to add some nuance here. As far as the energy of the stone goes, if we are looking at the materiality of a crystal for the source of its healing, no matter how it got to us, it's the same material body. It's made out of the same things, the same atoms, ions, and molecules came together in the same shape by the same processes. And, therefore the energy is there no matter what form it's in, no matter where we bought it from, how it was mined. And so far, we've mostly kind of stressed that in our conversation. But, at heart, I'm kind of a feral animist. I look to the spirit in things. I appreciate that there is consciousness in all of form, and not just the form that we can touch and see, but in the forum and the ethers and beyond. So out of respect for that consciousness, out of a desire to have an intentional collaborative relationship and not a material colonial kind of relationship, I want to do right by Earth, by crystals, by humankind. And the challenge that we've got is that because it is a relatively unregulated market, there is no specific body that governs crystal healing. We can't always know the story behind things, but there are things we can do. We can ask questions about provenance, which is an innocent enough question. Could you tell me where this comes from? Where in the earth was it mined? And you can learn. There are databases online where you can find out what kinds of mining and other labor protections are in place or not in various countries worldwide. You can look at important ore minerals and other resources being mined, some of which are classified as conflict materials. The truth is that most of what we work with in the crystal world is like byproduct of this kind of mining. So just because a rock like malachite might come from the Congo, where there are frequently some pretty horrific things happening in the mining industry, that malachite didn't cause it. That malachite might actually be what makes the difference between that miner and that miner's family having food and not, because they had to haul it out of the way to get to more important things like cobalt, tantalum, niobium, and that kind of thing. And the malachite is otherwise just in the way. So being able to sell off the tailings, what we call gang minerals, is really valuable and a viable means of sustaining people when they are not being paid fair wages through industrial mining. So it's a lot of gray area. We can't separate any one part of this from all the others. We have to factor in the ecological perspectives. And I sometimes see the argument that, well, if we're really worried about the environmental impact of crystals, and we should just work with synthetic ones or man-made ones. But then the question is, where did those raw materials come from?
Yeah,
it still came from the earth, from nature. And truth be told, if we're looking at things like lab-grown diamonds, for example, which of course can be sourced conflict-free, the energy footprint of that is like several dozen times greater than the energy required to just go mine a diamond. So we can't objectively say one of these is harmless, because it's not. And I think it boils down to this bottom line: there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, so we do the best we can with the tools we've got. And my goal is never to make someone feel bad for the tools they're using, but to help people lift one another up to get better tools. So we're all in this together.
And the more education, the more questions that you ask, and collectively, the more people that are coming to that conscious awareness and being more open and asking questions and being intentional with their purchases, right? In where we put our money and our energy, then those changes can happen.
They can, but this is not isolated to the crystal world. We are often scapegoated. You see, all sorts of clickbait about the mining conditions in Madagascar and Congo and other places. But what these articles aimed at shedding light on the crystal healing market fail to discuss is the fact that so much of this is secondary mining. So much of this is accessory to the real offenders in technology, in the makeup industry, in so many other things that use mineral resources. So I'm not saying that to absolve the crystal world, the crystal industry of guilt. Absolutely, we can do better. But we represent one of the smallest fractions of consumption of mineral resources. So even if we fixed this, it barely touches the problem. So we really have to remember to point that finger outwards to all of the other sectors of mining and extraction that are contributing to harm, that are contributing to unethical treatment of humans and the earth. And
not everyone is educated enough to ask those questions, right? So it's a very big it's a heavy burden that you're carrying, and you can see the passion that you're bringing to that conversation and bringing that awareness to people. Like, you really can Nicholas, when you go to your website and you're reading through, even when I was reading through the books, you can feel your intention in wanting to educate people and help make change, both to them individually and collective as a whole.
Well, thank you for that. That's really what I'm passionate about.
Yeah, and when you're a sensitive person, you can feel those things, right? In what people are bringing to the table. Can we talk about color, the color and shape of crystals, and how that plays into the function and the energy of the crystal?
Sure, absolutely. So I think early on in most people's attraction to crystals, color and form are two of the big ones that draw us in. Maybe it's the hot pink of a nice rhodonite, or the chartreuse of pyromorphite, or just a really nice grape jelly purple and some fine amethyst. You just love that color.
Fluorite, that was my go-to at the beginning.
And truth be told, color is an important tool on a psychological level. It represents only a very tiny fraction of what crystals do energetically. So one of my most influential teachers, who has since retired, she was really big on using physics as a model for understanding crystal energy. And when she eventually worked out how much of a crystal's energy is accounted for by its color, it was pretty startling. It's about 1/14, which is give or take 7%.
Wow.
7% of the energy we feel is due to its color. So that means about 93% or so is due to other things. And I don't say that to imply that color is meaningless, but color is one doorway in to that experience. It's not the only doorway in. Color is a powerful psychological tool, though. So if you absolutely hate the color green and I say emerald is the right stone for you, you're going to have a disconnect because of how you feel about green. Not because the energy of green is bad, but because your relationship with green doesn't support this journey that you're on. So we do sometimes have to check our baggage at the door, and other times, things creep up on us. I'm actually really profoundly colorblind. So thankfully, when you study geology, you learn pretty early on that color doesn't matter for IDing rocks and minerals. It's the least important thing that we look to. Something can have a really characteristic color that gives us a really big clue, but we still look at all the other factors. Things like crystal form, hardness, what kind of environment is it from, how does light play with it through its diaphaneity, and other kinds of things. And those are what we use for mineral ID. Color ranks at the very bottom of that list. So I have a little bias there. But at the end of the day, if we look at something like quartz, which comes in so many colors, or fluorite, your beloved fluorite, which comes in so many colors under the sky, I mean, the amount of variation that you will find, chemically speaking or structurally speaking, in a piece of purple amethyst versus clear quartz, mineralogically, they're the same substance. The amount of iron responsible for the color in a 1 foot cube of amethyst is about as much iron as you'll find in the tip of a ballpoint pen. It's not very much. It's a few stray molecules here or there. We're talking parts per million. In most cases, fluorite, similar. The kinds of variation is so minimal. So they have more in common, structurally speaking, chemically speaking, optically speaking, than they have that separates them. So I like to encourage people to look for what's similar in these things. If amethyst and smoky quartz are both fundamentally quartz, can you sift through the bias of color, the perceived expectation of what makes them different, and find what's similar? Because the more you can find that common thread and really isolate it on an energetic level, really get to know it, then you can spot what's different at a deep level instantly.
I love how you phrase that, right? We just have some comments that I want to share with you from Melody. She's saying each stone is an individual energy and being that she connects in with. And Michelle is saying that it's touch and texture for her when she's choosing, the touch and texture when she's choosing her crystals.
That's lovely. Yeah. I mean, really, we all find our own way in. There's no right or wrong way to be attracted to crystals or to perceive crystal energy. We've all got different gifts and skill sets. So, use the ones that speak to you.
If you almost want to have people, and I've done that with children, having them close their eyes and just holding their hand over a table that's full of crystals and choosing what they would normally choose is it shifts and changes when you're using just that energy feel to it, not necessarily sight. So that plays into the color, right? And what about the shape?
Yeah, so shape is another one of those things where I think we over psychologize it, which is, again, not to say it isn't important, but the external shape something is in is secondary to its internal makeup. So there's no amount of cutting, polishing, rubbing, grinding, scraping the faces that will change the way those atoms or ions or molecules come together to form that crystal lattice. There's no amount of carving that changes the geological environment it came from. We can't do anything to change that unless we really break it down and put it back together in a whole new way, in which case we don't even have the same rock. So what happens when we shape a crystal, when something does change shape, is we don't affect its fundamental energy, because that is a constant, but we can affect the way that energy is distributed. I think a really good analogy to make would be, it's like listening to the same song through different speakers or different sound systems. If you're listening to your favorite album on headphones, on earbuds, you get one experience. If you're listening to it at a live concert, it's a very different kind of experience. It's different when it's in your car. It's different when you've got surround sound in the home. It's different when it's a compressed file on YouTube, right? The fundamental information in that song is identical, but what we perceive changes each time. What is more noticeable might be different in the setting with more bass. We hear that better. Doesn't mean it wasn't there before. We just pay more attention to it. So changing the shape of a crystal influences the distribution of energy. It doesn't change what that energy is. So we look at something like a sphere, has the ability to softly, gently radiate energy in all directions simultaneously. If we have something with a natural point like the smoky quartz, it has obviously a very directional kind of flow to it. If we're looking at a crystal cluster, we've got lots of little points pointing in many directions. So that's really how I focus on shape. There's a practical side of it. If you want to do laying on of stones, spheres roll off the body. They're not a good choice. If you want something in the pocket, this is a really, really bad decision to make. My pockets are not big, and even if they were, I think I could injure myself or someone else. So, form and function are interrelated. The other thing that form can do is it can add a symbolic layer, a psychological layer to that. There's nothing about the physics of the shape of that little puffy heart that generates the energy of unconditional love. But culturally, by mutual agreement, we have this consensus opinion that heart symbolizes love. So there's a psychological aspect. There's a metaphoric or symbolic layer to what form can do. But that always takes a back seat to the material body of the stone and its inherent consciousness.
I've tended to be attracted to the clusters, and again, it's a psychological thing because I look at it thinking that when I meditate with that, I've got these crevices that I'm energetically going to be dipping in and out of, and each one's going to represent something different when I'm traveling with it. So that's what I have always tended to be pulled towards, are the clusters.
Yeah, we all have the things that we love.
Yeah. And again, in the journey, and there's more conscious awareness, right? The longer you sit with them, the more experience you do have with them. And building, do you have tips to share or inspiration that you can give to help people understand and develop their relationship with their crystals?
Absolutely. So my absolute number one thing to do, the homework assignment, I hope people will go and practice, doesn't look like a lot of work, at least not on the first level. So, pick up that rock you want to get to know, find the best light that you can, if it's natural grade, if it's artificial, do what works for you, and just get to know it optically. Look at it from every angle, hold it up and watch the light pass through it, see the light reflect off the faces. If it's safe and sensible to do so, you get to know it in a tactile kind of way. Some things are delicate and you could break them, so be mindful. Some things are toxic. You maybe don't want to rub your fingers all over them. In other cases, they're sharp. So use the senses that make sense. But as you get to know the kind of physical presence of the stone and feel its heft and understand how light passes through and study every texture on every surface, your conscious mind is having a ball. It's really enjoying the assignment, but you're getting this laser-like focus on this being, on this ally. So your subconscious mind goes, oh, great, we finally distracted the one who keeps talking, and now we can do the real work. So your subconscious mind will enter into a state of communion with it, as long as we aren't distracted by other things. Now, there are other layers to what we can do with this. First and foremost, just get to know it. Don't try to interpret. Don't try to do anything. Don't say, oh, I noticed this makes me feel this way. It has to be because of blank. No, just observe. Observe the crystal and observe your response to it. Maybe it's that rhodonite makes you feel really reassured. Maybe it's that agates feel playful to you. Maybe it's something you've never heard anyone else say, and that's perfectly fine. But you want to be able to repeat it, because the more we do this with the same stone, the more we start to notice what's our energy and what's theirs. If we want a slightly more advanced version of this practice, after we optically inspect it, after we get to know it in a tactile sense, close your eyes and see if you can recreate it in your mind. If you're not a very visual person, use other sensory input. See if you can recreate the experience of what the angles and faces feel like. See if you can imagine the smoothness of a tumbled stone. Try to just internalize it. And that's another way that we draw the energy, the consciousness of the stone into us for a kind of deeper relationship that happens later. And just be mindful of what pops up for you. Don't try to interpret or attach value or meaning to it. Just observe, because the effective scientist is the one not interpreting data from the beginning, but waiting until they have a big enough sample set to see what trends emerge. Because if we try to interpret from the beginning, we're going to slap our bias all over it, and that's going to affect the relationship. So just let things be in the beginning and have fun with it.
And not just slapping their bias on it, but especially if you're at the beginning of a healing journey, people tend to compare their journey with somebody else's journey, or compare their experience to somebody else's experience. So it can be a very individual experience they're having with that particular crystal that will be very different from somebody else. Is that a fair, how somebody is responding to a crystal may be totally different than the person beside them and their reaction and experience with crystal.
And when we take things at face value, it can feel discouraging if we play that game. But my process, my practice over many years now has been looking for the common thread. So, sometimes we'll pick up a crystal book. Behind me on these bookshelves, about 500 different crystal books.
Wow.
By all kinds of different people. And I will not profess to have read them all cover to cover, but I do reference them. I use them. I work with them. And you'll find lots of people who agree and lots of people who disagree on seemingly ordinary things.
Yeah.
So we have to ask ourselves, why do these experiences look different? Why is someone's interpretation or description of a crystal different? And I think it's because they get stuck at that first level, or they feel as if only communicating the first level is sufficient, given word count limits or editorial guidelines or just what they feel like. Anything is possible. But the challenge here is to stop and remind ourselves that if we're not following things through to the underlying principles, if we're not looking for the mechanism that's driving this therapeutic end result, then we cannot predict the same result for others. Let's use citrine as an example. I think we're all probably familiar with citrine. We know it as a kind of golden yellow variety of quartz. We think of it as an abundant stone. It's sometimes called the merchant's stone. It's a stone for prosperity and confidence. And those are all very surface level things that citrine does. And if we apply the deeper mechanism of it to someone's baggage, someone's life story, we get one set of results. If we take the same mechanisms and apply them to someone else's life story, someone else's baggage and bias, we don't get identical results because we're not identical people. And so the challenge is, unraveling these experiences, unwinding things until you get to that common point. And the thing about citrine is that its foundational message has absolutely nothing to do with abundance whatsoever. And I know so many people who turn to citrine and go, yeah, this didn't increase my bank account. I'm like, well, let's sit with this a little longer, because maybe we're confusing the side effect for the mission. And the goal of something like citrine is kind of twofold. The primary action is one of letting go, of unwinding tension, the kind of systemic tension that holds stuff in place, that kind of framework that keeps things playing out. And if we begin to loosen that, then it smooths things out for any and all processes of release, of elimination. So citrine has a kind of primary function of boosting all eliminatory processes of the body, the mind, the spirit. Maybe we're looking towards organs of elimination and using it to energetically support it. Maybe we're looking to citrine because of that thing Cheryl said in the office, and we just keep playing it over and over again in our minds. We can't let it go. So, we turn to citrine to help us with that. Now, the next part of that equation with something like citrine is it doesn't just stop with letting go, because suddenly we've made space. So there's room for things to flow again. And citrine's job from there is to awaken our memory, our kind of soul, almost blueprint level memory of what our potential can be. We get to choose how it's going to manifest. Obviously there are social and systemic things at play that we can't magically make go away with a crystal. But something like citrine is going to help us fulfill our potential. Firstly, by letting go of the things not relevant to it, letting go of the things that we hold on to that stand in the way. And two, helping us feel unburdened enough to take that next step forward. And when we fulfill our potential, one of the results of that is abundance. Abundance just means a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean money, unless we specifically mean financial.
Yes.
A fully realized, a fully actualized human being has an abundance of support in their lives, has an abundance of health, and we all have different bodies. Health is a moving target. So I can't tell you what luminous, abundant health looks like for you. I can tell you what it feels like for me. It means that we have an abundance of resources to meet our needs and support others in our lives. And those are all very individuated kinds of things. If we stop with citrine is for money, we miss most of what citrine is doing, nearly all of it, in fact. So it's about finding the common thread and being able to sit with the cognitive dissonance of my experience, maybe looking different from someone else's, until I sort through the baggage enough to find what the common mechanism is.
And that comes back to being okay with staying present. And it may be an uncomfortable moment, but breathing through that uncomfortableness to allow the space for the next thing that's coming in the next moment and the next breath, and just keep breathing through. It's funny that you use citrine too. Citrine, I never looked at citrine as the abundance. I always looked at it as clearing everything else around it. So if I was negligent with clearing any energy and not, if I was negligent in clearing my energy in those stones, that my citrine was going to support me in that. So I always saw it as a clearing stone, which makes sense in how you were. Now I just need to work with it a little bit more, but definitely making space and making room, right?
For sure. Back in the 90s, there was this kind of current of thought that emerged that said certain crystals never needed cleansing or clearing, and originally it was just two, citrine and kyanite. And so citrine has taken on this kind of larger than life idea that it never needs cleansing or clearing, and now the list has gotten bigger and bigger through a game of telephone. But I think citrine facilitates release. You're still the one doing it. It's not doing that work for you. It's supporting you in finding the resources, finding the reserves, finding the willingness to just unwind tension. So, certainly it can be helpful as a reminder in that regards, but, like all crystals, we want to cleanse our citrine, we want to cleanse our kyanite and our selenite and everything, because crystals have a memory to them. They're almost like a sponge, if you will, that's retaining an imprint of the energies and experiences they encounter. And we don't cleanse because energies are inherently good or bad. We cleanse because energies are relevant to what we're working on or not relevant. And if you carry a piece of citrine or rose quartz or amethyst or ruby out into the world, the perfect memory of that stone remembers every experience you've got. It attaches no judgment to it, unlike us. We do that. But not every energy you met is necessarily aligned with the reason you might be wearing that stone or carrying it or meditating with it. So, cleansing is part of our good spiritual hygiene. We've learned a lot about social and physical hygiene the last few years, and learned how to be proactive, I hope, in those regards. But we should be doing the same with our psychic and spiritual hygiene too.
Yeah, I agree. It's something that I talk about a lot, is that your spiritual hygiene is just as important as your physical hygiene. It is just as important energetically, right? And how would we cleanse or clear our crystals in a proper way?
So there's myriad ways to do this. If you ask, 10 crystal healers, what's your number one method for cleansing? You're going to get 20 or 30 answers. None of us have.
Is it personal?
Well, there are lots of ways, and different traditions around the world, of course, have developed their own kind of methodology for this. But there are methods that work because we can look toward a model in physics that demonstrates how energy might interact. And then there are those that work through, we'll say, metaphorical or symbolic means. Both work, but for one of them to work, we have to kind of believe in it. They're almost like faith-driven, if you will.
So will the crystal tell you if you've built that energy? Does that energy respond in a different way? If you try different clearing or cleansings, does it respond differently?
So, functionally speaking, if we have the right frame of mind, if we are in the right state of consciousness, which gives us the fuel required, we have the technique, whatever the technique is fine. That's our vehicle. And the intention we've set is to cleanse. They will all get us to the same place. It doesn't matter if you're driving a Ferrari or a beat up old, clunker, you're going to get there. So, where the caution comes in is the method we're choosing safe and effective for this mineral species? If I have something like chalcanthite, a beautiful copper sulfate mineral, which is, toxic if mishandled, I cannot cleanse that in water, because then I'll have a bunch of blue water, but no blue chalcanthite left because it will dissolve. Right. If I want to, place a beautiful crystal of selenite or hanksite on an amethyst cluster to cleanse it, I'm going to scratch that delicate mineral because it's not as hard as amethyst. If I want to leave something like aquamarine or kunzite or amethyst on a sunny windowsill to cleanse it, they're going to lose their color over time. And in the case of something like kunzite, if you have a nice gem quality piece, really saturated in color, it could be as quickly as 15 to 30 minutes you notice a visible change in color. So I find it really important to ensure that people know there is material harm we can cause to our stones. It's not necessarily going to affect their ability to do their job, but they lose monetary value, and they might also lose sentimental value. We can let our egos be hurt when we feel like we've hurt our crystal. Right. So the methods I recommend that are safe for any and all stones are smoke. Smoke works by the symbolic method, not necessarily because there is any physics driving that. It is a kind of universal ritual. So pick your cleansing herb of choice. You can also do sound. Now, sound is a vibrating column of air. It is mechanical vibration that's going to interact with a crystal lattice in therefore fairly mechanical kind of way. So that one's more physics-based. And then my absolute favorite, the one that requires no tools, no props, is using the breath. So I describe in several of my books my favorite breath cleansing technique. And the great thing about that is you don't have to wait for a full moon. You don't have to set some herbs on fire. You don't need a gong. You just need your breath. Because you might look funny in the office, depending on where you work, if you've got a Tibetan singing bowl or a chalice full of concentrated water or you spray.
Tuning fork.
But you can always breathe. And importantly, if breathing is not an option right now, cleansing your crystal is not your priority.
Exactly. I loved that. When I was reading through the Pocket Encyclopedia, and I read breath, I said out loud, yes, 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 because even like when I'm doing oracle cards, or especially runes, when I'm using runes, breath plays a part. But I mean, I'm using stones as runes as well too, and shells. So again, those minerals, but putting breath on it, and that's the very first time when I read it in your book, was the very first time that I'd read first that suggestion from someone to cleanse your stones with breath. It's very exciting for me. I was cheering, yay, from my chair. Like it was fabulous. What about charging them then? So if we've cleared them, how do we charge them?
Here's something rather controversial. Maybe don't charge them. Crystals are not batteries. You're not going to deplete their energy. Their energy is owed to what they're made out of and the inherent spark of consciousness within them. It's not like your mobile devices. You're not going to drain it and then it's useless to you. Now, there's an alternate meaning to the word charge, and we have to kind of situate things in a temporal context. The way we predominantly use the verb in ordinary speak, charge, today, usually involves our devices, right? Oh, my battery's running low on my phone. I got to charge it. I forgot to, charge this or that. But, earlier in the English language, that was one of many common usages of the word. And the reason the word charge worked its way into spiritual practice, charging crystals, charging an herb, charging a candle, actually comes from a meaning that means to give a task to charge with the responsibility of blank. So charging was a way of extending an invitation for collaboration, for imbuing your intention, for setting your focus. And it's as much about charging you as it is about the stone. So when it comes to charging our crystals, when we look at our memes that say, charge with this or that, most of those techniques are actually cleansing techniques. They're not actually about putting energy into a crystal. They're about taking the excess energy out. In my more advanced classes, I do talk about charging separate to programming as a means of instilling an additional vibration into the stone, not because we're going to deplete what the crystal does, but because I want to take advantage of some other quality or draw in some other force or elemental energy into the work that I'm doing. So yes, you can cleanse something under the full moon, or you could charge it under the full moon. But unless you're really being mindful of that, if you're not intimately aware of what the difference is, you're probably not, stuffing energy into the crystal, because that's just not its default state. Its default is to accept that as a cleansing kind of behavior. And the reason
relief for me in hearing that, because I've never I'm watching people talking about charging the crystals on the full moon, and I'm like, mine are all kind of sitting where I've put them. and I've not moved them outside into the sun. I've not moved them, and I've always had that comparison and judgment that I've not done something correctly, because I wasn't doing the norm in what you're seeing. And so thank you for educating, because
absolutely
it makes a difference. So I do have a question from Melody, who's asking, speaking of egos, what is his thoughts on when crystals break?
My thoughts are many and varied, and it always depends on the individual experience. But, currently in society at large, we have a tendency to attribute meaning and value when there isn't any. Sometimes stuff just happens. I hate to say it, but there's not
I agree.
a reason for everything. Sometimes the reason, you sneezed is because you inhaled pollen, not because someone had a message for you. So, most of the time when our crystals break, that's on the human part of it. It fell off a shelf. It went through the laundry. It, didn't get wrapped up well enough when you traveled. All these kinds of things happen. So most of the time, there's no meaning to be attributed to that. However, we still end up in the same place of, what do I do with my broken stone? And, the funny thing is that most of the rocks that we work with in our practice are not in their original state. They are prepared expertly or inexpertly to come to us. So if we think that we have miraculously rendered it inert or useless because it's been split in two, we have to remember that it came out of a much, much, much bigger piece. Something like this beautiful polished labradorite that I've got. This was part of a great big seam or vein, maybe part of a pegmatite, a humongous rock in the earth. So this is not, representative of a whole piece of labradorite. It's a section that got cut apart and polished. If we look at most of the polished towers and obelisks, same kind of deal. This came out of great big masses. They're not, individually polishing one-on-one crystals. I mean, that does happen occasionally, but not in the mass-produced stuff. So it's no more whole or no less whole than it was when it first came out of the earth. Even stuff that we think of as being unprocessed, this rough piece of dolerite, Priscilla bluestone that I've got, this stuff is, getting sledgehammered out or dug out of the earth. Mexican calcites are, put through crushing machines and then sorted by size and then given an acid wash because they're too delicate to like tumble polish. So they go through a lot of steps to come to us, even though they still look raw. So we have this kind of myth that, the crystals on the store shelves are complete and whole and perfect and unadulterated, but they've all been processed. And that also kind of does away with the myth that, some people believe raw crystals are more powerful than polished ones, but your raw crystals have been prepared too. And that's also not where they derive their power. At the end of the day, that's not where the magic comes from. So, when they break, I had a teacher who said, well, now you've got twice as many tools to work with.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But I do understand that there's a personal meaning in things. And I don't want to be callous and impersonal about that. Sometimes something we truly love is just not in the same state, and it hurts us to look at it. I don't think we really do any harm to the consciousness of the stone because their consciousness is decidedly more holographic and absolutely much less personal than ours. So it's in every particle and every piece that comes off of it. It exists unharmed, no matter what.
Melody is just saying, I've resonated with you throughout this talk so much and figured I would with your thoughts on that as well too, as far as crystals breaking. And I guess it's really letting go of what has been mainstream misinformation, maybe, or lack of knowledge or understanding. Because I know I have a pendulum and the tip is broke, but I love it. And when it broke, I know why it broke because I had mishandled it. So I apologized to it and still loved it. And it still works brilliantly for me. But somebody saw me working with this pendulum broken and they were horrified that I was working because they felt that the information I would be receiving would be incorrect or couldn't trust it because it's coming from this broken piece. So here's me talking to my crystal going, we're just gonna ignore her completely on every level until she has more conscious awareness. It sounds sort of judgy on my part, but that's where I was at that moment anyway.
For sure.
It's because it really doesn't. And again, it's I think sometimes it's maybe for me can be challenging to meet people where they're at, which again is about educating people, right? That there's bigger perspectives and a different way of seeing things.
I think part of the magic of meeting people where they're at is to not have the agenda of education. Where some people are at, they cannot be educated. They don't want to be. So
It's true.
I'm a finite human being. I might be, infinite on the spiritual level, but my material resources are finite. And I shouldn't gaslight myself into thinking I have to expend them at my own expense to support, to save, to educate others. And, the truth is that I think we put our message out. We hopefully do the best with that messaging that we can, and it's going to support the people it resonates with. And I'm finally
at the right time.
Yes, absolutely. Right timing is certainly a part of it, but I think I'm finally reaching a point in my path in my career where I understand I'm not for everybody. It's not my job to make myself for everybody. And if people want to meet me where I'm at, I'm happy to meet them where they're at. And if that's saying, here's a pretty rock, if that's going into the geology, if that's doing the woo-woo, I'm happy to do any of it.
Yeah. Brilliant. It's brilliant, Nicholas. It's brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a question that extends about the shape of the crystal, which you may have answered it. So I'm sorry if you feel like you're regurgitating a response again. Does the shape matter if you are creating a crystal grid? Can you explain the intention or what a crystal grid is, how we can construct that, why we construct it? Can we go there?
Sure. So let's start with that last piece first, because I think it's going to help us understand how form and function are related in this setting. So a crystal grid is an intentional geometric arrangement of stones that are organized in a way to achieve a particular outcome. So, if I have a pocket full of rocks and I slap them on the counter at the end of the day when I empty my pockets, that's not a crystal grid. No matter how geometrical it is, it's not very intentional. Emptying my pockets, I don't think counts as an intention in this case. The idea of crystal grids we see in its earliest form in the 1970s. They were called things like arrays and triangulations long before the word grid was coined. And nowadays you see a lot of people who use templates, a picture or printout of the flower of life or other kind of geometric forms to place their grids on. But like in the old school way, we just made grids on whatever surface was available. It didn't need to have a pattern or a picture underneath it. But the idea of grids is they work through the laws of synergy. So the law of synergy tells us that in a synergistic system, the total energy, the net effect, is greater than the sum of its parts. So, it's not 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6. It's 2 times 2 times 2 is 8 or more, however that might be. So when we work with grids, the end goal, as we get more tools in our toolbox and maybe more sensitive to energy, is we want something that feels cohesive and that feels, we'll say, energetically aligned, harmonious. And that kind of feeling is subjective. So, there's not a hard and fast rule for what you can or can't use in crystal grids. And people get so creative today and just incorporate the most beautiful minerals, large and small, in the most ornate patterns. So, the sky's the limit as far as the creativity goes. But when it comes to form, just think about, how does energy travel through this crystal? How is the energy distributed? And how does that contribute to the end result? So, if you're using things like tumbled stones, little rough pieces, the energy is kind of, just evenly moving through it, maybe a little less evenly than something like a sphere, but it's not very directional, and that's fine, because we're creating this larger energy field from all these smaller bits. But when we get to things like crystal points and other things that feel a little bit more directional, then we can start to think about, well, do I want the points going inwards to draw something toward the center? Is it a more projective kind of feeling? Do I feel like there's another kind of movement? It all depends on what stones we're using, what our intention or outcome is, what shape we're making. So we can get super creative. There's a whole chapter on grids in Crystal Basics, the one that came out in 2020. The energetic healing and spiritual power of 200 gemstones. And then there's a little snippet on grids in the new Pocket Encyclopedia. So feel free to refer to either for some decent info.
It was just that little snippet that was that I did read in the book was enough for me to, I've always been nervous about doing it in case I was doing something wrong. Does it go in? Does it go out? But it's really understanding the bigger purpose of that crystal and the purpose, like the intention and what I'm asking to work with, like where the energy is going to flow to or in.
And, at the end of the day, if you're sensitive to energies and you put it together and something feels off, just keep adjusting until it feels harmonious again.
Oh, well, that makes sense. So I need to not hold my breath so much, is what you're saying. I need to get out of my own way. essentially.
Get your feet wet. Just go out and do it.
Yeah.
Don't let perfect be the enemy of good, as they say.
Oh my goodness, I would never claim anything to be perfect. I think it's, I am definitely not everybody's cup of tea either. In the way that I present has really bucked the system, because it doesn't ever feel in alignment in the way that it's been taught for a long time in how I receive energy. So it's taken a lot. And I think maybe age too, getting to that place of not worrying how what I have to offer is going to be received. The right people will align with me when they're meant to, right? If we look at, if we can expand from that as healing tools, what would be those top 5 crystals that you would have in your healing toolbox?
So I want to preface this by saying 2 things. What works for me doesn't have to work for everyone else. You absolutely get to curate your own collection here. And 2, I consider myself, in this kind of case, a descriptivist rather than a prescriptivist. I'm not here to give you an itemized list and say, go get these things. I would rather tell you about trends that I've observed and use those trends as our data points to, maybe arrive at some good conclusion together.
I appreciate that approach.
Sure. So, first and foremost, if I were going to get prescribey about it, start with quartz. There probably already is some form of quartz in your toolbox. It can be any color, any shape, any variety. It could be clear, smoky, amethyst, citrine, rose quartz. It could be cryptocrystalline quartz like chalcedony, carnelian, agate, jasper. I guarantee you've got quartz represented in that toolbox somewhere, but particularly clear quartz is such a good all-purpose stone. It's, like the Swiss Army knife of crystals. It does something for everything, and it does it well. It's well-rounded and effective at the ways that we use it. Plus, if you get just a handful of clear quartz points, inexpensive ones that you can get at your local metaphysical store, you can make really easy grids by just laying out the number of points that either you have available or that matches your intention, because there's a numerology you could add to this, and a center stone of any flavor, and you've got a simple grid. Doesn't have to be complicated. So it's just such a good all-purpose kind of stone.
Right.
I would also recommend you get a good grounding stone, or more than one. This could be petrified wood or shungite or black tourmaline or hematite or red jasper, but we all benefit from a little anchor every now and then that helps us in being present. One of the functions of grounding is completing the circuit of energy between our body and the body of the earth, and having a safe place to discharge stuff is really important. If you don't have a complete circuit, it's all stuck with you. So grounding stones enable us to go through that process of discharging the things that might otherwise short circuit us. So pick your favorite grounding stone. And then definitely find something in your toolbox that we'll call emotionally nurturing. For me, like, my go-to is rhodonite. It is always nearby. It's on the desk in front of me. It's on the shelves behind me. It's often around my neck.
Actually, that was a question Michelle is asking, if you were wearing a crystal around your neck and what crystal you were wearing.
I am, and not that one. I'm actually wearing something called ophidic dolerite. That's this rough stuff I'm holding up. It comes from Pembrokeshire in Wales, and it is one of the building materials used in the construction of Stonehenge. It's also used in a bunch of other megalithic sites. It's commonly known as Preseli Bluestone because it comes from Meneth Preseli, or the Preseli Hills, Preseli Mountains in Wales. And it's a stone of ancient wisdom. It's one of my go-to stones. I have a really strong kind of soul connection to those sacred landscapes in Great Britain and the surrounding lands. So it's one of the gems that I work with continually. And it's my grounding stone par excellence. So that's what it fulfills in my top 5 list.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
So, so we got through that top 5 list. So the question, can you use the functions of a crystal without having the crystal?
In other words, can we tap into its energy when it's not physically present?
Yes, Thank you for articulating that in a much better way than I did.
Just wanted to make sure I answered the question you were.
Yes.
So, yes, I don't generally start people with this because there's a really important skill set that's required for spiritual practice, particularly any kind of intuitive practice, and it is discernment. And in particular, the discernment between two things, perception and projection.
Yes.
I will say with absolute certainty, after working in this field for as long as I have, about 90% of the stuff people think they perceive is a projection. That doesn't mean it's entirely a projection. And it also doesn't mean it's always a projection coming from them.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean that it's truthless, just that it's a projection. And so before we set about trying to tap into a crystal without it being physically present, we have to make sure that we can discern the difference. Like, is this really that crystal's energy, or is this wish fulfillment taking place in my mind? But once we've got a little bit of discernment there certainly are methods that can go into this. It's helpful for us to know the stone first. We should have some idea of what flavor its energy is, so we have something to recall, something to tap into. When all else fails, if you're a visual person, being able to see it in good detail can be a really helpful thing. But at the end of the day, if a sincere and we'll say unbiased request is being made, the mineral kingdom, Mother Nature, Spirit, whatever we want to personify, it's going to answer. And let's think about what's beneath our feet right now. No matter where you are in the world, whoever is watching live or on a replay, we're all on the same rock. We are all on planet Earth, and every known mineral species that occurs on Earth is beneath your feet. Now, it might be very, very, very far away from you, but it's still there. And if we can learn to tap into the geosphere, the part of the Earth that is, geologic processes, or the lithosphere, specifically hard rock, then we can kind of send out these energetic feelers that tap into the reserves, the wealth of minerals and rocks and gems and fossils and other things that are beneath our feet. But it does require some sensitivity. So yes, those things are possible, but start with what's accessible. What do you have in your toolbox? Instead of trying to exoticize and fetishize the expensive stuff, I bet there's a tool in your toolbox that does the job really well. And it's already in your toolbox. It's easier to call on its energy when you don't have it.
Exactly. I think for me, it was like tapping into, like when we're walking on sand, right? Where it's tapping into what's beneath the house and asking that energy to come up through and holding that space within whatever house we've been living in at the time and tapping into it. So not necessarily having a huge chunk of clear quartz underneath my house, which would be one thing, but tapping into what's under and envisioning that coming through up into the space that we were currently living. We do have another question from Anita. Would you get a crystal that is meant just for you on your birthday? So do those birth month gemstones resonate with us on our birthday, like our birth month stones?
I mean, if we're talking about the subject of birthstones, the short answer is it's complicated. Let's
That's
start.
the short answer. Complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated. So, how did we arrive at these 12 stones for our associated birth months? And it's a really long, circuitous route. What we see today that is regulated by modern trade organizations like the Gemological Institute of America, or the analogous things that you find in other parts of the world, those lists do draw from some traditional resources, but they're also very carefully engineered, very carefully selected to ensure that colored gems are sold all 12 months of the year, and that there's good distribution of price points. So you'll notice in the really expanded list that you get from traditional jewelers, there are going to be really spendy rocks, not so spendy rocks, and affordable rocks listed for each month. And that's in part to meet the needs of the consumer. But the truth is that some of the earliest lore that we have recorded in written history, in cuneiform writing, back like Babylon, Sumer, Mesopotamia, this kind of thing, starts off with planetary correspondences. And these, kind of transform over time to zodiacal ones related to all of the signs. And it's actually not until, I want to say sometime in the last 150 years, I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but a book was published in Polish relatively recently in human history, that makes the shift from sign to month. And that's how we end up with birthstones assigned by month. But the other reason this is complicated is because you are not just one sign. We use our sun signs now because it's the easiest thing to look up. You know what day you were born, and therefore you can just go online and Google that. It's not in everyone's wheelhouse to know what their ascendant sign is, what their moon sign is, what other things are. And it used to be that your ascendant, your rising sign, was kind of like the principal basis for astrology, for, horoscopes were based on your ascendant. But if you don't know your time of birth, your latitude and all the other things, it's harder to calculate. So we have a less sophisticated system out there to make it more accessible to all. But when you look at your whole chart, it doesn't matter where your sun is. The 12 slices of pie that are the 12 houses relate to all 12 signs of the zodiac. You have every sign represented in your chart. So the magic here is not just relying on what a consumer trade organization says is your birthstone, but picking a stone that matches where you are in life. Maybe that's based on the astrology, maybe that's not. And there are living, breathing practices that are truly ancient, like Jyotish, which is Vedic astrology, which you find in India. And it has its own sophisticated system of birthstones. They call them the Navaratna, the 9 gems, based on their 9 planets, which are different than the ones we use in classical astrology or Hellenistic astrology. But this is a system that's still alive and breathing, and we can use that. We can also use whatever works for us. So if you like your birthstone, work with it. If you don't like your birthstone, I'm giving you permission to pick another.
But some people need to hear that because it's so indoctrinated into them that this is what mainstream is giving us as information, right? So until you have a different place to ask those questions, you're kind of staying in that lane. So it's good that you're giving people permission to look outside those lanes.
My pleasure.
Melody is saying, Nicholas, you are a breath of fresh air.
Well, thank you so much, Melody. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay, I had a question and it left me. Give me 1 second. Where do you in moving forward, right? And in moving away from, like, just kind of expanding from the conversation that we had in birthstones, it's hard to maneuver through like the 500 books behind you. So, tapping into what feels right for you in this moment may not be the same as what feels right tomorrow or the next day. And do you find with crystals it's the same thing? How we use them, when we use them, what we're drawn to will shift and change based on our awareness, our healing journey. Our energy is going to shift and change. So our connection to the crystals will also shift and change.
For sure. I mean, we have friends that come into our life for seasons or lifetimes. We have foods that we outgrow and our palates change. We learn to love things like Brussels sprouts and kale over time.
Yeah.
And the same is true of our energetic palette. Our needs are going to change. And ultimately, this is in most cases a very good sign because you've been doing the work. Mm-hmm. You've integrated the lesson that Crystal has to share, and you're ready for the next chapter. So we sometimes do move on. And, other times we kind of meet that crystal that's like a soul friend and ally that's here for the long haul. And the goal is not necessarily to master everything that it's got, but just to receive its blessing and do your best to hold that blessing for as long as you can. And then you just keep going back for a reminder. So, rhodonite is one of those gems for me that I keep coming back to. I go through phases where we take a little break. I move on to other things, and then we come right back together because it's the medicine I need. It's the friend that's going to be with me no matter what. And it works. So I just keep doing that. But I think another piece of this conversation is to not just pay attention to the crystals you're attracted to. Pay attention to the ones that make you want to turn tail and run, because those are the ones that probably represent the greatest potential for healing. They feel so uncomfortable because
Yeah.
you feel outside of yourself. It's something your soul has yet to master or do or think or experience. So, work with it incrementally. I'm not telling you that if you hate the look of pyromorphite, you need to go find a 27-pound piece of it. That's probably not a great idea. But maybe you find something hard about the energy of ruby, and you get an inexpensive tumbled stone, and instead of taking it with you everywhere, you spend 5 minutes a day in your safe space when you feel reasonably well adjusted to connect with it and integrate, and you gradually build up the endurance, and you get to a point where all of a sudden ruby's your best friend.
Yeah.
That's a really great journey to go on too.
Can I share a story about that?
Sure.
Okay. I had, I'm trying to think now. My daughter, she was just young. So we are going back about 23 years. So going back 23 years, I had a friend had gone to Peru and had come back, and they said, "Hey, we're home, and I brought you back this stone that feels like it's meant for you. Do you want to come grab it?" I was super excited. No problem. Head over. Thank you so much. Give her a hug. Put the stone in my pocket, and I head to the grocery store with my kids. While I'm in the grocery store, I'm walking around, and my leg starts to hum. It's literally vibrating because I'm extra sensitive to begin with, but it's humming and vibrating. And I'm trying to still do the shopping. I get to the till to pay, and I start crying. I'm crying. I'm having such a strong reaction to the stone that's in my pocket. It was the wildest experience that I had with a stone. I don't even know what kind of stone it was. She didn't even know. She just brought this stone back and said, "Here you go." It was peachy color. It's some kind of, it looked like it had quartz through it. But when I went home, I put it on the desk and had my arm beside it, but I could still feel that vibration coming from it. That's one of those stones that I would not have chose. I would have run the other way. And at the time, I was really just sort of letting people know that I had these abilities to see and hear and feel the other side, and had from the time I was a kid. When I fell asleep, it was, I don't know, it was still affecting me a lot. So the next day I sat with it and held it and went into meditation. And I have never shared this story I like publicly, because I've always felt it was a little bit weird. But Merlin, who we perceive as Merlin, shows up and said, "This is about alchemy and having a sense of wonder, and you being okay with light and dark." And I had always said I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to go to the dark stuff. I just wanted to stay in the whole lovey lighty airy fairy world, right? And it's not all love and lighty airy fairy, and you have to embrace both sides. So yeah, that stone, and I actually didn't keep it. I put it outside the house in because it was bringing up so much stuff for me. Memories, places where it was like alchemy and changing from one thing to another, right? And having that sense of wonder. But it was very interesting to tap into, and having who I perceive as Merlin and that energy pop in during the meditation when I was using that stone. It was big and powerful, and so much healing, and propelling me forward in being okay with and embracing needing the duality, right? Needing duality of light and dark. I think the other takeaway that I had from that was tapping into those things without actually knowing what it is. You're feeling the energy of it. So I didn't need to know the name of the stone at the time, because I was just tapping into the energy of what it was. Does that make sense?
Very cool. I'm glad you had that experience.
It was a crazy experience. When I teach the intuitive, when I teach the connecting with your guides, I've called it "Who's Your Bob?" Like, who's your Bob? Because it's tapping into that energy without And the more that you tap into that energy and build a relationship, you're always going to know who you're tapping into. So with crystals, would it be the same? The more that you tap into it, you know the energy of that particular crystal without actually maybe even needing to know the name of it.
Sure. I mean, I've got that left brain
Left
science,
brain.
so I'm gonna solve the mystery. That's my job. And if I can't, that's fine. I'm
Yeah.
at a point in my life where I'm comfortable not knowing things.
Yeah.
But with the skill set I've got, I'm gonna try to crack the code. And if I don't have the answer, that's okay too. I have a few mystery rocks.
Do you have a few mystery rocks?
Yeah, I mean, they're mostly rocks, not like fine
Yep.
mineral specimens or gemstones or things.
Yep.
And I can get so far as saying what their kind of general geologic family is, sedimentary,
Right.
igneous, metamorphic, and the like, and identify a few components, and I just leave the rest at that. Hopefully I remember where they come from, and if not, they're still here. They're still doing something.
Do you have some inspiration or tips in encouraging people to have a sense of wonder? Like, we have to have a sense of wonder and stay open to all of these.
I mean,
properties.
If your spiritual practice is devoid of wonder, this is probably one of the few like hard lines that I've got. But if your spiritual practice is devoid of wonder, you're doing it wrong. Like, what we engage with should open us up. And it is through the state of wonder that we experience the miraculous. The miraculous is the suspension of disbelief. You can't do that without wonder. You are not open to miracles if you cannot have wonder. So start with the simple joys. When it comes to crystals, if that's the practice we've been talking about, it goes back to that first exercise. Turn off the distractions, go find some good light, and find beauty, find wonder, find magic in every humble stone and pebble, every fine mineral specimen, every piece of quartz, every tumbled stone, every piece of jewelry. Just spend a moment really looking at it with fresh eyes. It is easy to have, we'll say, wonder burnout. When you do the same thing over and over again, you sometimes kind of take it for granted. Yeah, this is wondrous. I get it. So we have to mix and match. We have to, take a different route home sometimes, so to speak, to keep ourselves really engaged and present. And I think in an increasingly media-heavy world where our consumption of media far exceeds what is probably useful for us, like, just press pause every now and then. Even if all you can manage is 10 or 15 minutes a day, go press pause. Find something beautiful. It could be a flower in your garden, a rock in your collection. Just go be present with it. If that doesn't bring you wonder, find a way to make it.
Yeah. Thank you. I saw you doing an event. You have an event coming up.
I've got a whole bunch coming up.
Yes, please share. Where can people find you?
So once a month I do a free online Reiki share. So I've got one coming up in mid-June or mid-July rather. My very next event is tomorrow morning, hosted by the College of Psychic Studies, and it's called the Sacred Stones of the British Isles. We're going to be talking about the kind of native rocks and minerals and fossils and their kind of energy signatures, their mythology and roles in history. So, of course, we'll talk about stone circles, but we're also going to talk about some pretty humble rocks that you find in the landscape there. I'm going to be speaking at a few conferences this summer as well. I'll be at Mystic South in Atlanta, Georgia next month, as well as at Temple Fest in Massachusetts in September. And then in, I think it's October, I'll be in, I think it's end of September, beginning of October, I'll be in the Pacific Northwest for the Northwest Tarot Symposium. And that's all in addition to the online events I do every month.
Right. Did I see working with elementals, like fae and fairy stones or elemental stones as well?
So one of the themes for Temple Fest this year is the fairy folk. So I'm doing 2 classes there, one on foxglove, the floral heart of fae. And I'll also be talking about in a separate workshop at that event, crystals that have fairy lore associated with them.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's exciting.
Thank you.
Do you, when you did Crystal Basics, you said there's 200 stones, over 200 stones in that book, and there's 450 in this one, in the Pocket Encyclopedia. Are there stones that that you would add in that didn't make it in, that, what would you add in next, or what potentially is like the next book with more stones in it, volume 2?
My publisher's not into sequential numbered volumes, so I don't know if we've got a Pocket Encyclopedia volume 2 in the works ever. I went in with a proposal that eventually changed shape to be like a 3-part series, and they nixed that. But I had a list of 600 stones for the Pocket Encyclopedia, which was a little ambitious to keep it within certain trim sizes and price guidelines. So I had to whittle it down to 450. So there are lots and lots of things that didn't make it in. We have to remember that there are over 4,000 named mineral species. I'm sorry, there's almost 6,000 named mineral species. And that doesn't take into account special varietals. So, smoky quartz, agate, carnelian, tiger's eye, geologically, they're one mineral in all these myriad forms and shapes. So we really have tens of thousands of rocks, minerals, fossils, gems, and variants that we can find. So there's no one book that has them all. And thankfully, that means I've got a long career ahead of me of continuing to write. I do have 2 other books under contract right now. I can't say a whole lot about either one. I have a 3rd proposal in progress as well. So I've got a really busy year ahead of me. There's a lot coming. And I always endeavor to have crystals in each book I've never written about before. So whichever books you get by me, there will be things that aren't in the others. Even, big Crystal Basics from 2020 versus the Pocket Encyclopedia, the 200 in Crystal Basics, not all of them are in the Pocket Encyclopedia. And for all the ones that are repeated, there's new information about them in the Pocket Encyclopedia. So they can be standalone or they can be complementary.
Are there stones that are yet to be discovered? Like, do we have that potential as well too?
Yeah, the human race names a handful of new mineral species each year.
Wow.
It's a relatively slow going process. The International Mineralogical Association has a special the Committee on Mineral Names and Nomenclature, CMNMC. They oversee the process of vetting new mineral species. So, earlier this year, they published a handful of new things. But at this point in the game, when new minerals get named, they tend to not be things that are very accessible to us. They tend to be pretty rare, hard to come by. It might result from the reclassification of another thing. But what we do see more of every year are old rocks in new formations, or an unusual batch of something common. So there's new varieties of quartz, and fundamentally, mineralogically, it's all the same species. It's just quartz, but quartz is a little bit of a shapeshifter. And when we get it from one mine versus another, there can be other minerals present that affect its color, its habit, or shape, and lots of other things. So we do get new discoveries of familiar things that still feel fresh and exciting. And we won't be exhausting those resources for probably thousands of years to come. There will always be something new and exciting out there. We just have to, again, practice discernment, because there are some crystal sellers and authors out there who are really keen on taking a really common rock and giving it a new metaphysical, sexy sounding name. To charge many times what it would have been worth. So, there's a lot of rebranded granite out there that at the end of the day, no matter how wonderful it is, it's still granite. I love granite. I wear it every time I leave the house. But I know what granite is worth. And, if we slap a new name on that's been trademarked, it only changes the perceived value. So we do have to be mindful that, yes, new things are discovered, but not everything with a new name is a new rock.
Thank you for sharing that. We have 2 questions. Try to fit these in the time that we have. Lisa is, yes, Melody is asking, are your online events on Facebook or Instagram?
I try to share as much as I can across social media. If you're on Instagram, if you check out the link tree that's in my bio or anywhere else that you find me, if you find the link tree, I update that constantly to reflect upcoming events. I'm going to be doing a big website update over the next week or so, and get my calendar up to date. I let that lapse a little. I also do a monthly newsletter, and you can sign up for that at my website, which is theluminouspurl.com. And if you want to find me on social media, I'm also at the Luminous Pearl in most places.
Okay, thank you. Lisa is saying, I am always drawn to moonstone or opal. Anything like that? What does that mean, if anything?
Well, here's where the ethics of interpretation comes into play. I can't tell you what that means for you. I could tell you about moonstone. I could talk to you about the geology of opal. We could look at the folklore, the history. We could talk about its energy. But what does that mean for you? It would be crossing an ethical boundary to tell you what it's supposed to mean for you. I would rather give you the data and let you derive meaning from that yourself. And any data that I provide you is going to be secondary to your personal relationship with those stones. So I'm going to answer your question with a question very rudely. And what does it feel like it means to you? Because that's the only question that matters.
Yeah. And it comes back to that homework exercise that you've given as well, too, to sit with it. And more than once, to sit with it and repeatedly sit with it and come to that conclusion.
Absolutely. And anyone who's tuning in, like, you are the authority in your energy field. You don't have to outsource that. So just trust that.
Yeah, this has been brilliant. Anita is saying, I really enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Anita.
Michelle is saying, I would love to hear more on relationships of sacred sites and ancient sites and crystals relevant to them.
Well, this is something that I've been spending a lot more time with. My best friend in life, but also in the crystal world, Ashley Levy. She's also a wonderful author, brilliant teacher, kind of generous human being. She and I partnered up for a tour of Southwest Britain earlier this year, and we got to visit sacred sites. And since we're both crystal people, of course, we brought crystals into it. And one of the themes that I've been working on unfolding from that trip and going forward is looking at realms like ethnogeology. What happens with the intersection between human beings and their geological environs? What about geomythology? How have human beings used myth to poetically describe the genesis of geological features? How do people select where sacred sites are situated within that kind of mythic context? So, I don't have a single place I can point you for that. It's something that I am continuing to work on. It's something that I'm hopefully going to do more with as time goes on as well.
But that's something to look forward to, right? And we benefit from you asking as many questions and where your left brain thinking takes you, and then how you incorporate all the other aspects of who you are into that. We get to benefit from the knowledge that you glean. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, she said, Michelle is saying, I'll look for the book. Which is brilliant. Thank you so much. This has been great having you on the show. It was so informative. And if you could give your website just one more time before we close out as well too.
Absolutely. So if you want to track me down, it's www.theluminouspearl.com. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook as @theluminouspearl. And if you're interested in any of my writings, you can find my books anywhere books are sold, your local indie bookstore, your local metaphysical shop. You can order them online through Amazon and Barnes & Noble and the like. And if you do love them, please feel free to leave a review. Let other people know what you loved about them.
Thank you. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into the show. Thank you, everyone that was in the chat and asking questions. And a big shout out to the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 New Orleans.